22 men, one manager, and one summer that changed English football forever. The 30th of July, 1966. Wembley Stadium, 96,000 people packed inside, millions more watching on television, and a country holding its breath. England against West Germany in the World Cup final. 4-2, a goal that may or may not have crossed the line, and a commentary line that would be repeated for the rest of time. They think it is all over. It is now. This is the story of the 1966 England World Cup squad. Every player, every role, every story behind the names that became legends. From the goalkeeper who many believe was the greatest ever to live, to the striker who watched the final from the bench and waited 43 years for his medal, from the 21-year-old who ran himself into the ground on the biggest stage in the world, to the 31-year-old who sat in the squad and never kicked a ball. 22 men picked by a manager who told the world England would win the World Cup before a single match had been played, and then went out and proved himself right. To understand the squad, you first have to understand the man who selected it. Alfred Ernest Ramsey was born in Dagenham, Essex, in 1920. He had been a solid, intelligent fullback who played for Southampton and Tottenham Hotspur, winning a league title with Spurs in 1951. But it was as a manager that he would make his name. In 1955, he took charge of Ipswich Town, a modest club in the 3rd Division South, and over the next 7 years he guided them up through the divisions, and in 1962, to the 1st Division Championship. It was one of the most remarkable managerial achievements English football had ever seen, and it caught the attention of the Football Association. In May 1963, Ramsey was appointed manager of the England national team, and from the very first day he made two things clear. First, he would have complete control over team selection, a power that had previously been held by a committee of selectors. And second, England would win the 1966 World Cup. He said it publicly, without hesitation and without qualification. People thought he was mad. He was not mad, he was simply certain. Ramsey's tactical philosophy was built on an idea that was revolutionary for its time. Throughout the 1950s and early 60s, English football was wedded to the traditional winger. Every team played with two wide men who hugged the touchline and delivered crosses into the box. It was the way the game had been played for decades, and nobody seriously questioned it. Ramsey questioned it. He believed that by removing the orthodox wingers and packing the midfield with energetic, versatile players who could attack and defend in equal measure, he could create a team that was harder to beat and more difficult to predict. The formation he developed, which the press would later christen the wingless wonders, was a narrow 4-4-2 that attacked primarily through the centre, with the fullbacks providing the width. It was not a system he arrived at overnight. It evolved over the course of 3 years of experimentation, friendly matches, and trial and error. And it would not reach its final form until the World Cup itself was already underway. Now the squad. Ramsey named his provisional list of 40 players in April 1966, almost 2 months earlier than FIFA required, and whittled it down to 22 by the 3rd of July, 8 days before the tournament began. Every single one of those 22 men played in the English First Division. There were no foreign-based players. There were no journeymen. It was a squad of elite professionals, hand-picked by a manager who knew exactly what he wanted from each of them. In goal was Gordon Banks of Leicester City. He was 28 years old, with 27 caps, and he was already considered one of the best goalkeepers in the world. Banks was calm, athletic, and possessed reflexes that bordered on supernatural. He would go on to make arguably the greatest save in football history 4 years later, denying Pelé with an impossible diving stop in the 1970 World Cup. But in 1966, his contribution was less about spectacular moments and more about quiet, authoritative control. England did not concede a single goal in the group stage, and Banks was a major reason why. Behind him sat two backup goalkeepers. Ron Springett of Sheffield Wednesday was 30 years old and had 33 caps, more than Banks at the time, but he had lost the number 1 jersey and would not play a single minute. Peter Bonetti of Chelsea, known as the Cat, was 24 with just 1 cap. He too would watch the entire tournament from the bench. 4 years later, at the 1970 World Cup in Mexico, Bonetti would replace the ill Banks for the quarter-final against West Germany, but that is a story for another day. The defence was built on the partnership between Bobby Moore and Jack Charlton at centre-back. Moore was the captain, and at 25 years old he was already one of the most composed defenders in the world. He played for West Ham United and had 41 caps, a number that spoke to how quickly he had established himself at the highest level. Moore did not rely on pace or aggression. He read the game better than anyone alive, intercepting passes, timing tackles with surgical precision, and distributing the ball with an elegance that was unusual for a centre-back in that era. He was the leader of the team in every sense of the word, and Ramsey trusted him completely. Beside him stood Jack Charlton, the older brother of Bobby, a very different kind of player. Jack was 31, a rugged, no-nonsense defender from Leeds United who had only 16 caps despite being one of the best headers of a ball in the country. Where Moore was grace, Jack Charlton was granite. He won everything in the air, frightened opposing strikers with his physical presence, and did the ugly work that allowed Moore to play with freedom. Together, they were almost impossible to get past. At right back was George Cohen of Fulham, 26 years old with 24 caps. Cohen was a one-club man, loyal to Fulham throughout his career despite the club's lack of silverware. In the wingless formation, the fullbacks were expected to provide the width that the absent wingers would normally supply, and Cohen did so with relentless energy. At left-back was Ray Wilson of Everton, at 31 the oldest outfield player in the starting 11. Wilson had 45 caps and was one of the most experienced defenders in the squad. He made a crucial error in the final, his misdirected header falling to Helmut Haller, who scored West Germany's opening goal, but Wilson recovered with a performance of immense composure thereafter. Behind these 4 defenders sat 3 reserves who never played a minute of the tournament. Jimmy Armfield of Blackpool, 30 years old with 43 caps, had been England's captain and first-choice right-back, before losing his place to Cohen. Jerry Byrne of Liverpool, 27, had only 2 caps, but was famous for playing the entire 1965 FA Cup final with a broken collarbone. And Norman Hunter of Leeds United, just 22 with 4 caps, was already earning a reputation as one of the most fearsome tacklers in English football. Fans called him "Bites Your Legs Hunter." He would go on to win 28 caps, but in 1966 his job was simply to wait. The midfield was where Ramsey's tactical revolution lived. At the heart of it sat Nobby Stiles of Manchester United, 24 years old, toothless, barely 5'6", and absolutely terrifying. Stiles was the enforcer, the man whose job it was to break up opposition attacks and win the ball back so that the more creative players around him could do their work. He tackled with a ferocity that alarmed opponents and, on occasion, alarmed the Football Association as well. After a particularly aggressive challenge on France's Jackie Simon during the group stage, the Football Association demanded that Ramsey drop Stiles from the team. Ramsey refused. He reportedly told the Football Association that if Stiles went, he went too. Stiles stayed, and his joyful, toothless dance around the Wembley pitch after the final, clutching the Jules Rimet trophy in one hand and his false teeth in the other, became one of the most iconic images in the history of English sport. Alongside Stiles in midfield was Bobby Charlton, and if Stiles was the destroyer, Charlton was the creator. Robert Charlton of Manchester United was 28 years old with 68 caps. By far the most experienced player in the squad. He had survived the Munich air disaster of 1958, in which 8 of his teammates perished, and had rebuilt himself into one of the finest footballers in the world. His surging runs from midfield, his thunderous shooting from distance, in 1966, the same year as the World Cup, He won the Ballon d'Or as the best player in Europe. The great Eusebio was reduced to tears at the final whistle. Charlton died in October 2023 at the age of 86. The other two midfield slots in the wingless system belonged to two young men who were, in many ways, the key to making the whole thing work. Alan Ball of Blackpool was the youngest player in the squad, just 21 years old with 10 caps. He was small, ginger-haired, and possessed an engine that never stopped running. In the final against West Germany, Ball was widely considered the best player on the pitch. He ran himself into the ground, covering every blade of grass, harassing the German midfield, and providing the cross from which Geoff Hurst scored the controversial third goal in extra time. Ramsey's wingless system demanded midfielders who could attack and defend with equal intensity, and Ball embodied that demand more completely than anyone. He was only at Blackpool at the time of the tournament, a club that was a long way from the glamour of the World Cup final, but his performances in the summer of 1966 prompted Everton to sign him for a British record fee of £110,000 shortly afterwards. Martin Peters of West Ham United was 22 years old, with just 3 caps when the World Cup began. 3 caps. The idea of a player with 3 international appearances starting a World Cup final would be unthinkable today, but Ramsey saw something in Peters that others had missed. He called him a player who was 10 years ahead of his time. Peters was intelligent, ghostly in his movement, and had an uncanny ability to arrive in the right place at the right time without anyone noticing. In the final, he scored England's second goal, a volley in the 78th minute that appeared to have won the match before Wolfgang Weber's last-gasp equaliser forced extra time. Peters was the third West Ham player in the squad, alongside Moore and Hurst, and the connection between the three of them, the instinctive understanding that came from playing together at club level every week, was one of the foundations of Ramsey's system. Behind these 4 midfielders sat 2 reserves. Ron Flowers of Wolverhampton Wanderers was 31 years old with 49 caps, making him one of the most experienced players in the entire squad. He did not play a single minute. It was a measure of the quality Ramsey had at his disposal that a player with that many caps could not get on the pitch. Ian Callaghan of Liverpool, 24 years old with just 1 cap, was a natural winger who started the group match against France, but was then dropped as Ramsey moved decisively toward the wingless system. Callaghan would not play for England again for another 11 years, an extraordinary gap between caps, but he remained one of the finest players in the history of Liverpool Football Club. He is still alive today, at the age of 84. And then the forwards. This is where the most famous story of the entire tournament lives. Going into the World Cup, England's first-choice strike partnership was Jimmy Greaves and Roger Hunt. Jimmy Greaves of Tottenham Hotspur was 26 years old with 51 caps and 44 goals. He was, by almost universal agreement, the most naturally gifted goal-scorer of his generation. He had scored goals everywhere he had played, at Chelsea, at AC Milan, and at Spurs, where he would finish as the club's all-time leading scorer with 266 goals. He was quick, intuitive, and clinical. If the ball fell to Jimmy Greaves inside the penalty area, the odds were overwhelming that it would end up in the net. Roger Hunt of Liverpool was 27 with 13 caps, a very different kind of striker. Hunt was not as technically gifted as Greaves, but he was tireless. He ran channels, pressed defenders, created space for others, and offered Ramsey the kind of selfless work rate that a wingless system demanded. Hunt would go on to play every minute of every match from the quarter-finals onwards. Geoff Hurst of West Ham was 24, with just 5 caps. 5. He had made his England debut only 5 months before the tournament, in a friendly against West Germany in February 1966. He was the understudy, the man on the bench, the player that nobody outside of Ramsey's inner circle expected to start the final. He was not flashy, he was not prolific in the way Greaves was, but he offered something different. He was strong in the air, he could hold the ball up with his back to goal, and he had an understanding with his West Ham teammates Moore and Peters that was instinctive and deep. But it was football's cruelty and fortune that would give him his chance. In the third group match against France, Greaves suffered a shin injury after a challenge from France's Joseph Bonnel. Bonnel's studs came down on Greaves's leg and split it open. 14 stitches were required, and the wound was deep enough to leave a permanent scar. The injury ruled Greaves out of the quarter-final against Argentina, and Hurst stepped into his place. It was one of those moments that hinge on pure chance. If Bonnel's boot had landed an inch to the left, if the challenge had been a fraction less severe, Greaves would have played against Argentina, and the entire history of the 1966 World Cup might have been written differently. But the boot landed where it landed, and Geoff Hurst, 5 caps to his name and the weight of a nation's expectations suddenly on his shoulders, walked out at Wembley to face the most violent match the tournament would produce. What happened next changed the course of English football history. The quarter-final against Argentina on the 23rd of July was one of the most brutal and bad-tempered matches the World Cup had ever seen. The Argentine players fouled constantly, cynically, and without remorse. Their captain, Antonio Ratin, a towering midfielder who stood 6'2", argued with the referee throughout the match and was eventually sent off in the 35th minute for what the German official Rudolf Kreitlein described as violence of the tongue. Ratin refused to leave the pitch for nearly 10 minutes, and the match teetered on the brink of abandonment. When he finally departed, he sat on the red carpet that had been laid for the Queen's arrival and crumpled a small corner flag in his hands. The match remained goalless until the 78th minute, when Hurst rose to head home a near-post cross from Peters. 1-0. England were through. Ramsey was so disgusted by Argentina's behavior that he physically prevented George Cohen from swapping shirts with an Argentine player and, in a post-match interview, called them animals. It was a comment he later regretted, but in the moment it captured the fury that the match had provoked. England then beat Portugal 2-1 in the semi-final on the 26th of July, in what many regard as the finest match of the entire tournament. Portugal were led by Eusebio, the Mozambique-born striker who had scored 9 goals in the competition and was the most feared forward in world football. But Bobby Charlton produced a performance for the ages. His first goal, struck low and hard from the edge of the area in the 30th minute, gave England the lead, appeared to seal the victory. Eusebio pulled one back from the penalty spot in the 82nd minute and nearly equalised in the closing stages, but Banks held firm. As the final whistle blew, Eusebio walked off the pitch in tears, consoled by Bobby Charlton, who put his arm around the Portuguese striker in a gesture of sportsmanship that remains one of the most touching images of the tournament. England had reached the final without conceding a goal from open play. The defence that Ramsey had built, with Banks in goal, Cohen and Wilson at full-back. By now, Greaves had recovered from his injury. He was fit and available, and the press, almost unanimously, demanded that Ramsey bring him back for the final. Greaves was England's record goal scorer. He was one of the most lethal finishers the game had ever seen. Surely Ramsey would not leave him out of the biggest match in the nation's history. But Ramsey was not a man who bowed to public pressure. He looked at his team, at the balance, the understanding, the momentum they had built, and he made the hardest decision of his career. He would not change a winning team. Hurst would play. Greaves would not. The decision was never explained publicly. Ramsey did not believe he owed explanations to anyone. Greaves sat in the stands on the 30th of July and watched his teammates play the biggest match of their lives without him. There were no substitutes on the bench in 1966. The rules did not allow them. If you were not in the starting 11, you did not play. You sat and watched. And for a man of Greaves's pride, a man who had scored 44 goals for his country and was the most prolific striker of his generation, sitting in the stands while someone else wore his shirt was agony beyond description. He later admitted that he could not bring himself to celebrate when Hurst scored. He tried, but the joy would not come. The greatest day in English football history was, for Jimmy Greaves, the worst day of his professional life. The remaining squad members, who have not yet been mentioned, were John Connolly and Terry Payne, both orthodox wingers who were casualties of Ramsey's tactical evolution. Connolly, a 27-year-old from Manchester United, with 19 caps, started the opening match against Uruguay, a goalless and much criticised draw that raised serious questions about whether England were good enough. Payne, 27, from Southampton, with 18 caps, started against Mexico in the second group game and had a poor match. Both were dropped and never played again in the tournament. Their removal from the team was the moment the wingless wonders were truly born. And finally, George Eastham of Arsenal, 30 years old, a gifted inside forward who did not play a minute but whose legacy extended far beyond football. In 1963, Eastham had won a landmark court case against his former club Newcastle United, challenging the retain and transfer system that effectively treated players as the property of their clubs. The ruling was a forerunner to the Bosman decision 30 years later and changed the landscape of professional football forever. Eastham died in November 2025 at the age of 88. The tournament itself was a study in controlled escalation. England started slowly, drawing 0-0 with Uruguay in the opening match on the 11th of July. It was a dour, cautious affair, and sections of the Wembley crowd booed the team off the pitch. The press were unforgiving. Questions were asked about whether England were good enough, whether Ramsey's tactics were too defensive, whether the prediction of World Cup glory had been premature arrogance. Ramsey ignored every word. He knew his team would improve. He knew the system would take time to settle, and he knew that not conceding goals was more important at this stage of the tournament than scoring spectacular ones. They beat Mexico 2-0 in the second group match with goals from Bobby Charlton, a thunderous long-range strike that flew past the goalkeeper, and Roger Hunt. Then they beat France 2-0 with Hunt scoring both, although the match was marred by the vicious tackle on Greaves that would change the course of the tournament. 3 group matches, 3 clean sheets, 6 goals scored, and a defence that had not conceded once. The press criticism had evaporated. England were beginning to look like exactly what Ramsey had always said they were. In the quarter-final, they faced Argentina, and the match descended into chaos. Ratin's sending off, the constant fouling, the attempts to waste time and disrupt England's rhythm. It was ugly, brutal, and unforgettable. Hurst's header won it, and England were through. The semi-final against Portugal was the best match of the tournament. Eusebio, the Mozambique-born striker who had scored 9 goals in the competition, was the most dangerous player England had faced. But Bobby Charlton was magnificent. He scored twice, a first-half strike that was driven low and hard past the goalkeeper, and a second-half goal that sealed the victory. Eusebio scored a late penalty to make it 2-1, and was in tears as he left the pitch. England had reached the final without conceding a goal from open play. The defence that Ramsey had built, with Banks in goal, Cohen and Wilson at fullback, and Moore and Jack Charlton in the centre, had been virtually impenetrable. And then came the 30th of July, 1966, the biggest day in the history of English football. 96,000 people crammed into Wembley Stadium. Queen Elizabeth was in the royal box. The nation had come to a standstill. West Germany were a strong, disciplined, well-organized side managed by Helmut Schön, and they had beaten the Soviet Union in the semi-final to reach the final. This would not be easy. It started badly. Helmut Haller gave the Germans the lead after just 12 minutes, capitalizing on Ray Wilson's misdirected header. The ball fell to Haller inside the area, and he drove it low past Banks. Wembley fell silent, but the response was swift. Just 6 minutes later, Bobby Moore was fouled. He picked himself up, took the free kick quickly, almost casually, and delivered a perfect pass into the path of Hurst. It was a goal, the West Ham understanding that Ramsey had placed at the core of his team. Moore saw the run before Hurst had even started making it. The match was tight and tense throughout the second half, with neither side able to find a breakthrough. Then, in the 78th minute, Alan Ball won a corner on the right. The ball was played into the area, struck the crossbar, and rebounded to Martin Peters, who volleyed it home from close range. 2-1. England were 12-missingly slowly. Ramsey's men were defending deep, trying to see the game out, when in the very last minute of normal time, the ball was time. Ramsey's response in those moments before extra time began has become the stuff of legend. While the German players collapsed on the grass, exhausted and relieved to have survived, Ramsey strode onto the pitch and told his players to stay on their feet. "Do not sit down," he ordered. "Do not show them you are tired. Look at them. They are finished. You have won it once. Now you have to go out there and win it again." The words galvanized a team that had been seconds from glory and had it snatched away. Alan Ball, who had already run farther and harder than anyone on the pitch, who was 21 years old and playing in the biggest match of his life, found another gear entirely. In the 101st minute, Ball received the ball on the right and delivered a cross that Hurst met with a fierce right-footed shot. The ball struck the underside of the crossbar, bounced down, and was cleared by a German defender. The question of whether it crossed the line has been debated for 60 years and will be debated for 60 more. The Swiss referee, Gottfried Dienst, was unsure. He consulted the Soviet linesman Tofik Bahramov from Azerbaijan, who indicated that the ball had crossed the line. The goal was given. 3-2 to England. And then, in the final minute of extra time, with the Germans pushing desperately forward, Bobby Moore collected the ball in his own penalty area and delivered a long, raking pass upfield to Hurst, who ran clear of the defense and smashed the ball into the roof of the net. 4-2. The final whistle blew seconds later, and Kenneth Wolstenholme delivered the most famous line in the history of English football commentary. "Some people are on the pitch. They think it is all over. It is now." Geoff Hurst had scored a hat-trick in the World Cup final, the only player ever to do so. Jimmy Greaves had watched from the stands, and here is perhaps the cruelest detail of all. In 1966, only the 11 players who appeared on the pitch in the final received winners' medals. The other 11 members of the squad, including Greaves, received nothing. No medal, no formal recognition, no acknowledgement that they had been part of the squad that won the World Cup. It was not until 2009, 43 years later, that FIFA retrospectively awarded medals to every member of every World Cup winning squad. Greaves, by then 69 years old and in declining health, finally received his medal. He said it was terrific to have finally been recognized, but the bitterness of being left out of the final never fully left him. He died in September 2021 at the age of 81. As of today, in the summer of 2026, 60 years after that day at Wembley, only 3 members of the 22-man squad are still alive. Sir Geoff Hurst, now 84 years old, is the sole surviving member of the 11 who played in the final. Ian Callaghan and Terry Payne, both of whom played just 1 match each during the group stage, are also still with us. Everyone else is gone. Bobby Moore, the captain, the leader, the man who lifted the trophy, died of bowel cancer in 1993 at the age of 51. He was the first to go, and his death, so young, so sudden, shook the football world. Bobby Charlton, the Munich survivor, the Ballon d'Or winner, the beating heart of the team, died in 2023 at 86. Jack Charlton, who went on to manage the Republic of Ireland, died in 2020 at 85. Gordon Banks, who made the greatest save the world has ever seen against Pele in 1970, died in 2019 at 81. Alan Ball, the youngest of them all, the boy who ran himself into history on the 30th of July, died of a heart attack in 2007 at just 61. His death was the one that felt most cruel, taken too soon before he had the chance to grow old with the memories that his teammates carried into their later years. Nobby Stiles, who had suffered from dementia in his later years, a condition that many attributed to the heading of heavy leather footballs throughout his career, died in 2020 at 78. Martin Peters died in 2019 at 76. Ray Wilson died in 2018 at 83. George Cohen died in 2022 at 83. Roger Hunt died in 2021 at 83. Jimmy Greaves died in 2021 at 81. One by one, the men of 66 have departed, until only 3 remain. But the legacy of that squad endures. It endures not just in the trophy, not just in the famous photographs and the commentary lines, but in the way it changed the entire philosophy of English football. Ramsey's wingless wonders changed the way the country thought about tactics. The 4-4-2 formation that he pioneered became the default system in English football for decades, adopted by club and country alike, from the muddy pitches of the lower leagues to the floodlit stadiums of the First Division. The idea that a team could win without traditional wingers, that midfield industry and defensive organization could triumph over individual flair, was revolutionary in 1966. And while the game has evolved beyond recognition since then, while football has become faster, richer, and more global than Ramsey could ever have imagined, the principles that he instilled in those 22 men — discipline, preparation, tactical flexibility, collective strength over individual vanity, and the unshakable belief that a well-organized team can beat a collection of superior individuals — remain as relevant today as they were 60 years ago. 22 men, one summer, one trophy, and a moment in time that an entire nation has never forgotten and never will. Like and subscribe for more football documentaries. Until next time.